Welcome everyone. My name is Sherry Barnabas and I am the moderator for today's call entitled How to Justify Modernization Projects Using ROI. On today's call we have Mr. Steve Collins. In Steve's 19 years with LAOSA, he has played roles of architect, designer, project manager, quality manager on many large and innovative projects and actually prototypes LAOSA's very first web application. Steve is a regular speaker at the LAOSA user conferences and has presented at various seminars and written technology and project management articles for industry publications. Now, before I turn the call over to Steve, just a couple of quick housekeeping tasks. First, the webcast technology that we're using today is called GoToWebinar. So in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you're going to find the attendee control panel, which gives access to various webinar functions. For example, if you have questions or problems during the presentation, you can either raise your hand to get my attention or type in a question using the question and answer section. All of the conference-related questions will be answered at the end of the presentation by Steve, and I'll take care of all of the other questions as they come in. So enough with the housekeeping tasks. At this time, I'd like to turn the call over to your presenter, Steve Collins. Steve, you may begin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for attending. Looks like we've got quite a good turnout, so let's just get started here. So we'll start with just a little image here, a fitting proverb. I'm sure you can imagine that this is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And this is absolutely true. You know, if you sit back and relax for too long, your systems may continue to function, but they'll definitely start to show their age or their rust. And we need to squeak long before the system's rust becomes irreparable. We need to speak up, but we have to do it in the right way. And that's what this presentation is really about. Okay, so basically in today's climate, you can't just come up to a CFO or an executive and recommend a project. More than perhaps any time in history, or at least in recent history, funds are tightly controlled and funding is only going to be released for projects that have a really good, strong business case and as well a return on investment. So this session is just going to walk you through the steps that we've had success with in our practices of preparing presentations for an executive audience and specifically a CFO that's going to be releasing funds. Okay, but before we start diving straight into return on investment calculations, there are some prerequisite things that need to be done. So the first is, of course, finding the right initiative to begin with. Coming up with who the target audience is for your presentation where you're seeking funding, and then really demonstrating a core vision of what you're trying to achieve through the project, and then breaking that down into a list of key business and technical requirements. So before we jump into the ROI calculations, we'll just have a look at each of these. So in terms of determining the right initiative, many organizations I've seen have significant walls between IT and business. The business can see IT as a necessary evil, but not really a partner. And IT can see the business as having unreasonable expectations. And when you talk to each of them individually, they often describe the other as just not getting it. So interactions between the two groups tend to be either very superficial, like, you know, IT's requested for something like a forgotten password or a problem or something, or it can be quite negative where there's complaints about how IT is dragging down the business and preventing growth. So regularly scheduled dialogue is really the only surefire way of understanding each other and being partners with aligned goals. So we basically recommend that all of the issues or opportunities are discussed openly, and that basically you brainstorm from various angles. So the business and IT get together and brainstorm to talk first about business topics. So if you're an IT manager, focus on the business. Understand the current business, the pains, competition, industry changes, growth plans, key marketing strategies, whatever the case may be. And there may be resistance on one side or the other to having regularly scheduled meetings. Maybe people will say they're just too busy for such meetings, but that really is a recipe for stagnation. So the next step, once you've discussed each of the issues and they're well understood, is to throw some possible solution approaches out for discussion. So for example, if an issue is that product development is taking too long, then you'll need to understand the current manual process and consider workflow automation. If your large customers are calling in orders because the website requires too much manual entry, then consider if direct machine-to-machine integration with their procurement systems and your ordering system would help. If new customer service reps balk when they see existing old text-based systems, explore what they would want to use and what they've used at other companies. So basically you're just asking a lot of what-if questions and exploring a lot of things. But really at this point constraints don't help. Everyone knows it's not possible to do everything all at once, so there's no point in lamenting that at this stage. It just hampers creative thinking. And obviously don't invite your CFO to these kind of meetings. This is really something where you're bonding between IT and business and exploring possibilities. So the third step is really reflecting on how the project initiative is going to support the organization's mission. Every company basically has a mission statement. Sometimes you have to find it, dust it off. You know, it's not something that is prevalent in the minds of people, although maybe it should be. So basically, you know, a mission statement like Acme Incorporated's goal is to be the premier global provider of complete widget solutions, achieving this through product differentiation and unparalleled customer service. I find that someone high enough in the organization does see the value of the mission statement. Perhaps they wrote it. So it helps to use this ammunition to justify your modernization project. So the next step is I guess this picture looks a little silly with 4 people standing around holding hands and meditating, but it is important. I'm a really big believer that onboarding starts long before a new modernization system or a new system or a modernized system is released to the users. Onboarding starts with IT and business envisioning the future state together and kind of, you know, meditating on how life would be like in this brave new world with this new system in place. So, you know, perhaps you're thinking about how we've extended our legacy system with an integrated workflow system that streamlines processes, is paperless, makes better use of resources, and allows management up to the executive level to witness daily, weekly, monthly operations on, say, a performance dashboard so that processes can be further refined and resources can be shifted and retrained and so on. Customers are now getting more accurate information when they call customer service because customer service has access to knowing where things are in the workflow system at any given time. And maybe customers can even subscribe to email alerts so that they can track their orders when they reach certain stages and so on. So it's just a matter of imagining the future state as clearly as you possibly can. So the next step in this is really envisioning it from your CFO's perspective. And I'm not saying that CFOs are babies or toddlers, but I'm definitely saying that they tend to be quite intentionally grounded, level-headed, skeptical, pessimistic. And you know, they're not the type of people that buy impulsively when they're waiting in line at the Walmart checkout line. They're also very aware of any risks of change. They understand that every change has risks, and there's only so much capital to go around. So they're always comparing you to other competitors, and one of those competitors is really just the status quo. So rather than embarking on some new modernization project, what's wrong with what we have today is a question that I'm sure your CFO would be asking. Okay, so basically in this first step of identifying the right initiative, I like to think of it as one that's clearly justifiable on the surface but needs a lot more work to draw it out before you go off and present your ideas for funding. So the next step is really thinking about your target audience for the presentation and funding request. And remember that the topic of this session is how to use ROI to justify our modernization project. So it's really likely that the biggest audience member you need to appeal to is your CFO. And it's a little known fact that every CFO globally takes an oath of allegiance. At least I like to think so. So I will not approve a significant project the first few times I hear of it. I will not approve of a significant project proposed by only one group. If an idea seems to have business backing, I'll buy time by ordering a feasibility study. I will not stick my head out to offer support. I will not stick my head out to offer resistance. And I will look for value and await consensus. And eventually I'll fund projects that have financial merit and passionate business sponsorship. I don't know if that's true for CFOs that you've dealt with, but every CFO I've ever met fits this kind of description. So as I said, I like to think that they all take some sort of secret oath of allegiance that we don't know about. Really, the other audience members I think of as a situation like where you're trying to pass a bill through Congress or something. You have to think about it from each department head's perspective. Is your idea or your initiative going to be welcomed? Are they going to hate it? Are they going to try to steal it and make it their own? You have to make sure that every single department head has something to gain out of it. And then one of the most important things is if you're an IT manager, then you need to find some like-minded business sponsor that is influential high-end financial benefits. You know, you're just planting seeds at this point. You're not making any kind of commitments, and there's nothing like a deadline to motivate you toward the next step. So it might make sense to pick a deadline for when you'd like to present to the CFO. So we're not ready to present yet, Mr. CFO, but in April 30th, we're going to be ready to present and ask for funding. So the next step is really to emphasize what the core vision is and draw that out so that you're ready for it. Basically, that means that you first need to do some homework to justify a project scope. To do that, you want to meet with each business area that would be impacted by this initiative, incorporate their feedback, and basically determine a fairly early on vision and business case without all the details just yet. And then At that point, you're seeking approval for a deeper study. Deeper studies take time. They take resources. In the case of LAOSA, we help our clients with this step, and there's a cost involved. So sometimes approval needs to be pulled for that cost to be allowed. So in order to do this, your business sponsor and IT together co-present to the executive, walk through the vision, ballpark costs, benefits, etc. Not in any detail, but just trying to show that it is a reasonable initiative that you're trying to pursue. You also need to show what analysis you've done to date, and more importantly, what information is missing. And then you describe what that deeper study is going to be, what the activities are in a project scope, what the effort and time and costs are, and basically end by asking for formal approval and support of the project scope. So the next step is to conduct a project scope so you can really draw out what the key requirements are, among other things. So what we do when we're involved in these with our clients is that first we have some on-site meetings. They can be a day, 2 days, 3 days. It really depends on the situation and the scope of the project and the complexity. So in these meetings we want to meet with the executives, we want to review the key business objectives, you know, if we're talking about a modernization project, what are the benefits of it, looking at the existing systems, looking at the existing processes and reviewing those with the process owners, and so on and so on. And ultimately at the end of the week we storyboard what we've learned and what we see as being the right approach for taking the initiative forward. So that's the first step is meetings, and then we have deliverables, which in our case typically include you know, some vision creation with a modernized user interface, what the workflow impact might be if there's an impact there, system integration with various partner systems, extension with additional data capture and maybe some data structures to support that. And ultimately, one of the most important things is to have a very credible, detailed project plan which draws out all of the tasks, who's responsible for them, how long they're going to take, and therefore how much they're going to cost. So those are the typical deliverables that we present coming out of a project scope. Sherry? Looks like we have a quick polling question here. Okay, so hopefully on your screen you see the poll is open, and if you can, just select one of these answers. So in your organization, how formally are significant initiatives analyzed before approval?
And I'll give you a heads up when we're close. We're about 50% right now, so
Okay.
once we get up to about 80 or so, we can close it out and show the results.
Okay, thanks, Sherry.
Okay, I'm going to close it out and then share the results for you.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like 40% require really just a concept, some ballpark costs, and no formal project scoping in order to get a significant initiative through. 16% do require formal scoping, but no return on investment analysis. About a third require ROI predictions as well, and 12% of you feel that you can't get any project funded whatsoever. So that's actually an interesting split there of things. I expected that the 40% number would actually be smaller in this day and age, but maybe you're able still to to get things approved just based on your own credibility as IT or business managers. For the last group there, the 12% that said they can't get any project funded, I guess I would just challenge you that if you do make a compelling argument where there is a return on investment that is just completely obvious and low risk, that obviously that really should be funded. Otherwise, your executive management isn't really doing their job. So hopefully you can bring that forward. Okay, thanks, Sherry. We'll continue on. Okay, so as I mentioned, we conduct a project scope, and that's made up of meetings and then deliverables, and then ultimately it ends with a project scope presentation. So I just kind of want to show you briefly what a project scope presentation might look like, at least the way we conduct them. So this is a real, these are slides from a real presentation that we gave a while ago, and basically we'll just walk through with the audience the business vision, the objectives, all the things coming out all the way down to return on investment analysis and business benefits. So this is a real situation where we have at the time a prospect that's an insurance company that is one of the larger insurance companies in the Caribbean. And they, on their own, before we got involved, had a business consulting group from actually a local school that worked with them to draw out what their pains were. And they were a typical, like a large insurance company. What happens is that people call up looking for information about their insurance claims or changes to their policy or whatever. And the CSRs in customer support really were not equipped with the information necessary, because a request would come in and it would go through largely through paper processes or offline processes from desk to desk to desk, and the CSR would never really know where something was, so they could only give a very vague update. And what they were looking for is to be able to provide better customer service by giving information at the time, which is very, very accurate, and eventually having web-based and mobile-based systems to allow customers to self-serve using that information. So we relay back to them what their key business objectives are. Obviously, everybody in the audience should be nodding at this point, saying, yes, I recognize what the key business objectives are. And then we just walk through what's been done to date. We walk through that we've done our homework, basically, that a project scope has been conducted with meetings and offsite preparation of deliverables, and that, in our case as a services company, that we have expertise having done these kind of modernization projects in the past, and with lots of good case studies and so on that we can draw on. So then we just walk through what the solution components are. In a modernization situation, you often have existing assets, of course, and the executive sponsor needs to be able to realize that you're not throwing everything out, that there's value in what you have today. You're in business, you must be doing a decent job, and therefore you don't want to throw away everything. But you do want to extend. So in this case, you've got an existing system and you want to modernize with some additional value, and just explain that to them, and that the fact that it's a very low-risk maneuver. So then one of the most important things, I think, is to build some vision into this so that the audience starts to see that, starts to imagine the end solution. So in this case, through mock-ups and other things, we use our tools to provide a vision of what the solution might look like, and we demonstrate that vision to the client. In this case, we just have a screenshot of what a modernized insurance system might look like. And we highlight some cool things that they might appreciate. In this case, some business objects for navigation, allowing very quick access to customer information through some filters and so on. And ultimately, leveraging existing legacy screens that they have today and pulling them into the modernized framework so that everything's in one place for the users. Okay. In this case also we had a custom workflow toolbar which allows people to be able to see where their policies are at any given stage or their insurance claims are or whatever. And this is where we're equipping everybody that touches that business object along the trail to be able to see what's been done to date and so on. Okay. So again, we just build more and more vision of what the solution might look like. Some of the business benefits are obvious. One of the things that an insurance company produces is paper policies, basically. That's one of the main things that they do. So in this case, we're showing that whereas today this company would draw on existing templates in Word and go through a very manual process to create a policy, the system that we were highlighting for them took templates, drew that together with business information from their legacy system, and with a click or two automatically created a PDF document which then goes through a process and gets signed ultimately. So in this case we're talking about new business policy creation, and we show that the combination of the existing system, some document templates, and workflow allows it to very quickly go through an approval process where ultimately that policy contract is signed and put in a document management system, but also sent off to the broker or agent or the insured so that they have that policy in force. So then we talk about the phasing of the project. We remind them what the business objectives were and then say, okay, this is going to be phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Maybe we put some dates on them as well as to when they can be achieved. And then another very, very important thing that we need to do to establish credibility is to show a project plan. So in this case, the project plan was quite granular. It had 346 tasks. You know, the people you're presenting to don't need to see those 346 tasks. They can just see the summary level, but they need to understand that that work has been done and it's available to them if they really want to dig through and see all of the details. Every single item there in the task list has to be completely justifiable along with its estimate and what's going to be delivered out of that task. Otherwise, you lose a lot of credibility, of course. So, you know, at this point we've got all of our prerequisites in place. We've figured out what the right initiatives are by having IT and business meetings together. We've thought about things from our audience's perspective. We've built up a vision and we've nailed down what the key requirements are. And so the next step really is to look at it from a return on investment point of view. So in terms of return on investment, it's really, you know, defined as the ratio of money gained or lost on any investment relative to the amount that was originally invested. So there's lots of different formulas to calculate return on investment, and you know, I actually have a math background, so these things are I guess familiar to me, but scary sometimes to others that really don't like math and haven't looked back since they took it in grade 12 or whatever. So just looking at it in a very simplistic way, let's say you have a capital investment that you're making of $100 and you're expecting an incremental return on that investment over, let's say, a 4-year period. Everybody can imagine then that if you have invested if you've invested $100 and in year 1 you get an incremental gain of $40, well, that's a 40% return on investment. In year 2, 45, and so on and so on. So that's really all that first formula for arithmetic return on investment or rate of return is calculating. The next one, which looked complicated, is the average arithmetic return. And really that one's not difficult either. You just add up all of the percentages, the 40%, 45, 35, and 30, and divide by 4 because there happen to be 4 of them. So you just average those out, and they arrive at a 37.5% annual arithmetic rate of return as an average. And then the geometric average return is a little more complex, and but not much more. In this case, you take the multiplier of the 40%, the 45%, and so on. You multiply those together, and in this case, you end up with 3.56, which then instead of dividing by 4, what you do is you take the 4th root of it, or you do an exponentiation to 1/4, which is really easy to do in Excel or a calculator or whatever. What I guess the point here is, though, is that if you look at the two results, the 37.5% and the 37.4%, you can see that in most cases, and certainly in this case, whether you just do simple averages or you do a more complicated calculation, 9 times out of 10 your rate of return is actually very, very similar. And I don't think that you really need to go through all of this calculation. Let your CFO do that. But what you do need to deal with is the just the top bit, where you're basically identifying what the capital investment is and what the expected rate of return is for each year. And then somebody else can do the detailed calculations and cash flow and so on. Okay. So in terms of business benefits, ROI is one part of it, but not every business benefit can be completely measured that way. So what we try to do as well is show our approach for how return on investment is actually calculated. So basically, the first step, as we've talked about, is identifying the pain, and that's happening in those weekly meetings, in the vision of the solution. One of the things, though, that I'm adding here is the idea of risks. And so every project, every change has risks. And if you just focus on the likely outcome or the ideal outcome, you're really going to lose a lot of credibility. So what typically is done is that you calculate your gains in present value. So if you have gains over 4 years, what are those gains really worth today? And you predict the impacts, and you also measure them from across very different, all the different sources of business benefit. You need to come up with a way where every single one of them is measurable. It's not just a general feeling for customer service improving. You have to have surveys or additional orders or something to back it up. So how are you going to measure each of the impacts? The percentage of success needs to be calculated for each one as well. So in other words, I think that it's 98% likely that we're going to achieve blah. That needs to be calculated. And that needs to be done for both the risks and for the likely benefits. And in both cases, you come up with an expected gain and what the expected risks are as well. And ultimately, if the expected net gain outweighs the expected cost, then that should mean that things are moving ahead. And the last step, which I think is quite important and often forgotten, is that at the end of one of these presentations that we do for a board or a committee or whatever, what we like to do is stand up and say that everybody needs to hold us and the business sponsor, the IT manager, everybody accountable. And so we will be coming back to them in a few months after go live with what the actual results were, what the ROI was, and compare to what was originally envisioned. And hopefully your numbers are good, but either way, it really gains a lot of credibility for you that you're willing to do that. So in this case, there's obviously many different sources of ROI. Since we're talking about modernization projects, there's usually two main things. One is that you're modernizing the user interface, and the other is that you're modernizing business processes and really optimizing business processes. So looking at the first one, where you're really just focused on the user interfaces, we have built a toolkit in Microsoft Excel, and it basically allows you to enter in some parameters, filling in the blanks. It forces you to think through modernization as an alternative to complete system replacement via custom development or implementing a package. And really every modernization project has to pass through this kind of sanity check or crucible before it's approved. So, you know, this kind of technique is helpful just to put some math behind what your instincts are of what a modernization UI is going to give you. The second one is really focused on business process improvement. And in this case, it really lends itself well to a much more detailed ROI analysis. So again, we have a template for this as well, where in this case you have, you list up here who the actors are in your existing business processes, how much overhead costs they carry today per year and therefore permit, and then looking at every step in the existing workflow, how much does it cost to get through this specific process. And you go through each and every one of these processes in your organization, each and every one of these workflows, and you figure out what does it take today, and then you figure out under the new world that you're envisioning, how much is it going to take and who's going to be doing the work. So there may be different individuals doing the work under the new world future state. There may be some automation where things all of a sudden don't involve any manual effort. And ultimately you're coming up with what the difference is that you're expecting in terms of the impact of reduction of cost. There may be some other things beyond you know, actual business process costs. There may be some additional things, like in this case, you might have some write-offs that are occurring, and these write-offs would go away or be lessened under a modernized system. So combined, you come up with what you expect the annual difference would be to your bottom line. There are some additional complexities. I am, I guess, simplifying things to some extent. Using expected value to account for risks is something that really should be done. So in this case, let's look at an example. We've got 3 different risks. What you do is you kind of drop a percentage on top of each one of them. So the first one is 10% likely, the second one's 5% likely to happen, and there's a 40% chance that risk will occur in the third area. And then you say, okay, if that risk actually happened, what would the impact be? And in the first one, it's a $50,000 impact. The second one, it's $1 million impact. And basically, all you do when you come up with expected value for those risks is you just multiply through. So you say, okay, 10% times $50,000 is $5,000. 5% times $1 million is $50,000, and so on. And altogether, the risks add up to, let's say, $59,000. So that's just a way of identifying the risks and putting kind of a measurement on them so that you can use that as part of your determination of whether to go forward. You can also look at expected values over time and expected risks over time. So most of the time when we're helping our clients define this, we are looking at things over a 3 or 4 or 5 year period, depending on what they're used to seeing. And if you really want to get crazy, you can do additional things like net present value calculations and logarithmic returns and so on. But again, I would leave that to your CFO. So really, I mean, the ROI part is what completes the project scope presentation. So we looked through the solution approach. We looked through the phasing of the project and the benefits that we're trying to achieve. We talked about our project plan, and that gives you a lot of credibility, as we said. And lastly, you need to be able to come up with what the business benefits are and the ROI is. So when we start showing the actual return on investment prediction, this is where eyes really light up. In this case, this specific presentation, I blurred out the numbers, but it was given first to an executive committee and then to the board. And they really get excited about the possibilities when they see dollars and cents. But they'll always ask, do you really believe that this is achievable? And the IT manager and business sponsor needs to be able to answer yes, arm in arm, or you really haven't done your homework. But this slide is really the one thing that I find the CFO and the top executives can totally relate to. And we do this for, again, in the case of this client, it was an insurance company that had a whole bunch of different business processes. We went through every single one of them with them, showed what the net impact would be that we're predicting, and ultimately combine that all together into one predicted impact. So, you know, we're a product and services organization offering system solutions. So in our case, we also have a slide that just talks about next steps of achieving a project mandate and, you know, licenses and so on. But the important thing is that you do highlight what the next steps are so that you are asking a question and getting an answer. And then we just leave up a slide at the end to remind everybody of what the vision is and what's been achieved to date and so on. So I think we've covered it all. We've determined the right initiative. We've talked about identifying your target audience and envisioning things from their point of view, getting their support, drawing out what the vision is and really what the key requirements are to be able to put together ultimately a business case and ROI predictions that will really appeal to your audience. So, you know, this has worked for us, as I've said, across many different companies and many different industries for modernization projects and for all types of projects. And in this case, you know, we take pride in the fact that the client did provide this kind of feedback, where they emphasized that the project scope was very sensible and we grasped their ideas very well, but ultimately it was the ROI calculations which gained approval for funding for the project. So that was really key to them and key, we think, to achieving this kind of mandate from other clients as well. So that's really the end of the presentation, and I think Sherry will open it up for questions.
All right, great. Thanks, Steve. So if you have any questions for Steve, what you're going to do is you're going to open up your attendee control panel, which is in the top right-hand corner of your screen, and type your question into that question session. So as we wait for a couple of those questions to queue up, at the end of today's presentation, you're going to have a survey that's going to pop up that has about 5 or 6 questions on it. We really do value your feedback, and filling out the survey helps us better understand what your needs are. So if you have any pop-up blockers, you want to make sure that you turn them off so that you can receive the survey. Well, it looks like we do have a couple of questions that are coming up. So what I'm going to do is just start reading them and let you answer, if that's okay, Steve.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. The first one says, how long do your project scopes and ROI analysis take, and what's the cost?
Okay. I guess the answer is it depends on the situation. We've done project scopes that last just a few days, maybe 1 or 2 days of on-site meetings or even sometimes remote meetings. And then the deliverables vary quite a bit as well. Oftentimes in the deliverables, one of the things that takes the longest is creating a prototype, which is aiming to prove something. So maybe you're trying to prove that something is viable in terms of improving a user interface. Maybe you're trying to prove that you can integrate with existing systems in order to, I don't know, automate a campaign management exercise or to build a web or mobile interface. Whatever it is that you think you're trying to prove, it takes time to build those kinds of prototypes. So it can be anywhere from a day to build a simple mock-up to could be a week or two in order to build a real detailed prototype which ultimately is evolved into your final solution. So I would say our average project scope is probably 4 days of meetings and then 4 or 5 days for deliverables, which would include a prototype and project plan and all of those types of things. And typically it's somewhere around $1,500 per day for the services related to that. And we ideally want to meet our clients directly, and therefore, there might be some travel costs or whatever as well. But hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, we have another one that came in that says, what is the typical ROI do you get for BPM and screen improvements?
Okay, so I guess for screen improvements, it can be anywhere from 0 if you're really not doing a proper job. If all you're doing is taking an existing, let's say, text-based user interface and screen scraping it, where you're not really improving the flow of process that the person is going through, if all you're doing is changing the look of the screen, then the business benefits and ROI are really limited just to the satisfaction of the user doing their job, and therefore maybe they're going to be a little more productive. Training time drops because your users that are being trained will be able to use more of a point-and-click method that they're used to compared to what they're doing today in your system. But really, that's going to be very hard to justify a modernization project just on that alone. So most of the projects that we deal with do a lot more than that. You'll extend your user interface to your customers. You'll also perhaps integrate with partner solutions. And even if you are just focused on the user interface, for internal users, let's say, you put it in a framework which allows them to be able to navigate faster and get access to information faster. So even if they're using virtually the same screens to be able to, let's say, enter an order or whatever it is that they're doing, the screens that they use leading up to that can be modified or developed such that they get information so quickly and they're able to understand the situation, and ultimately the end result is that they're able to get through processes a whole lot faster, not because their actual key punching is faster, that basically remains the same, but because they know what to do when a lot faster. So I can't give you a percentage on what the ROI might be. It really depends on the situation and what the business benefits are for the specific users.
Okay, we have another one that came in. It looks like it's more of a statement. For large funding requests, we have to go through RFP process. Analysis and ROI study is sort of handled through the RFP.
Right, okay. Yeah, so this is common. I mean, for larger organizations and governments, they often go through an RFP process, sometimes even an RFI process first, and our company does respond to those types of things. So what usually happens in the RFP is by the time the RFP is written, it's been identified what the business benefits are, what the sources of ROI are, but until they really get into more detail through a project scope, they won't be able to list all of the tasks. They won't be able to come up with a vision that's sufficient enough in order to actually calculate ROI predictions. So there's still a place for a project scope, and what's typical for us is that we'll respond to an RFP, Hopefully we'll be able to deliver a presentation on site with some more details, and then we do ask for a mandate to conduct a project scope at the beginning of the project so that we can bring forward all of the risks, all of the concerns that need to be prototyped out, and make sure we're all on the same page. As well, we can calculate ROI predictions at that point and serve them back to our client to make sure they sanity check them and feel good about them. So there's still a place for project scoping and ROI analysis, but usually it follows an RFP process. It doesn't usually happen within an RFP process.
Okay, we have another one that says, how do we build ROI for the ROI study itself?
Oh, okay. Good question. So earlier in the presentation I talked about gaining funding for a project scope. So typically if you have these regular meetings between IT and business, you need to be able to come up with what the vision is going to be. It needs to be at that, as I mentioned earlier on, it needs to be what seems to be a clearly justifiable vision. It needs to be able to list what the sources of business benefit or sources of ROI are, and maybe you've got some information to back you. So maybe you've done some surveys of your customers and you found that 37.6% of them find that placing orders over the phone is painful and they want to do something else. Or maybe you've surveyed your internal users and you've found that they find that if they only had blah, they would be able to act more efficiently. So you need to draw some evidence of where ROI sources may be, and then I think you need to show the project scope itself from the point of view of what's going to be done, what deliverables are you going to produce coming out of the project scope. And usually if you're suggesting that there is going to be a significant return on investment is likely, sales are going to go up by 6% and that means several $1,000,000, and your project scope itself is going to cost $10,000, and it is going to deliver these detailed cost predictions and ROI predictions. Usually that's enough to get the project through funding. And if not, sometimes the IT manager and business manager together just pool their resources, their existing budgets, and get it approved that way.
Okay, it looks like we have one last question here. Can I get a copy of the PowerPoint and the XLS with the ROI calculations?
Oh, okay. Yep, so my email ID is on screen there. If somebody wants that, they can just email me a request for what they're looking for, and I'll be happy to set up a call with them or something to make sure I know what it is they're looking for and send some stuff along. I can't send along the ones that are real from existing clients, of course, because the numbers are real as well, and that's confidential, but the framework and templates I can probably share in most situations. So send me an email and we'll talk.
All right, great. Well, that looks like it is all the questions that we have for today. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and you may now all disconnect. Have a great day, everybody.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.